remember the last time we talked, so you mentioned that you're only 24, and I couldn't believe my eyes, to be honest. I mean, of course, you look super young, right? But are you sure about your age, Tanya? Because you broke see while still pursuing your studies at university. You moved to Singapore, then you traveled 20 countries before turning 20. Now you're a media strategist for a crypto startup, and you just simply break the rules. I mean, like look at you, right? So you are female tech, and I wouldn't say that it's not the very usual visual that you kind of link to, female in tech. So just this is Tanya, right? And on top of that, you also have a very sound Russian name, I'd say. So it was definitely a catch for me. Is that correct, what I just talked about you? Or maybe you want to just add up a few other words about yourself and introduce yourself.
Yeah, for sure. No, I remember the first time that we spoke, I was also very blown away by you because, I think we bonded a lot over how you grew up in Russia and then moved to Germany. And then, I had a very similar experience like growing up in India. And I feel like culturally, Russia and India do have a lot of similarities. And the cities that we now live in, you live in Germany, I live in Singapore, they have a lot of similarities. So I thought it was really cool, like your story as well. But yeah, I am 24. And yeah, I think so I grew up in India, moved to Hong Kong for university because at the time, China, it was just booming. And I was very curious about, business in China, and Hong Kong is the gateway to China. So I thought it would be a really cool opportunity to understand China and that part of the world because I didn't really know too much about it. So that's why I moved to Hong Kong for university. Had an amazing time while I was there. It's a very, very international city. So got to meet a lot of people from around the world. And I wanted to also, that's what inculcated that feeling of wanting to travel as well in me. So I spent all my time in university, trying to find any way I could to travel. So I would do like competitions, internships. That's how I ended up traveling to 20 countries before turning 20. And then at the same time got introduced to venture capital. And I think, we can talk a little bit more about that in depth. And yeah, and then found my way, to Singapore, now working with a crypto startup and also running my own podcast. So that's a quick introduction.
Yeah, that's just very quick, but still quite impressive. Awesome. So now you're based in Singapore. You did quite some travels. And 100%, it's a very important point, right, that you mentioned the VC, because that's also not quite a common story, because I don't know how it's like in Singapore and that part of the world, but in Germany, it's very much like you really have to, win that spot in the VC. You really have to have, like, first of all, quite an impressive CV. You have to have quite a track of record, right, before you actually enter VC and to be there at the university level. So was there any sort of maybe like initiatives that really took you on board, or how did it happen that you were at the VC at such an early age?
Yeah, I think it was definitely quite tough because, again, I didn't have a very traditional background in the sense of, have all these amazing internship experiences or, have that kind of network because I was new in Hong Kong. I didn't really know anyone. So initially, when I wanted to get into VC, I just started reaching out to people on LinkedIn, and about like 95% of the VCs didn't respond. But I do remember there was this one guy who responded, and he told me, you should start going for VC events, just start meeting VCs because it's at the end of the day, it's a networking business. And so you have to network your way in. And so I had to get a little creative with that. So even with the, events and conferences and things like that, it's usually quite expensive to attend. And I was in university, so I didn't have a lot of spare money for this. So I would usually just, email the conference organizers or message them on LinkedIn and ask if I can volunteer for the conference, because they always need like volunteers, helpers, and things like that. So I've been the reception person at more events than I can even count. But, while I was checking in guests and checking in VCs, it created like this really amazing opportunity to speak to them. And that's how I got into VC, because one of the guests who I was checking in to an event, she was a VC and I knew about her, and I used to listen to a lot of podcasts and interviews that she had done. So
Right.
when she came to me and, I was signing her in, I was like, oh my God, I've heard so many of your podcasts and I think what you're doing is really cool. And I just really want to work for you. And she was like, okay, just come to my office tomorrow and I'll interview you. And I was like, okay, that's crazy. But anyway, so I went to her office the next day and we had like a really good chat. And she wasn't really someone who was looking for, a traditional background either. So she never really asked me any questions about VC as such. She was just curious to learn more about me as a person. And yeah, so honestly, that was the only interview that I did for that company. And I was supposed to be there for 3 months, but I ended up staying for 3 years. And that was my story.
Wow. So it was basically like a bit of luck, I'd say, and
Yeah.
be very bold, creative in a way how you wanted to connect people, right? But I totally agree with you, because at the end of the day, all the startups ecosystem, it's business people, it's kind of like, you really have to just know people sometimes. It's not even necessarily about, your CV or whatever knowledge you have behind you. Of course, knowledge plays the role, right? But
Yeah.
it's really about this personal bond, I'd say. Amazing. So maybe then podcast also caught your attention about you, that
Yeah.
yeah. So you had this common ground. Cool. I mean, we definitely will touch base on your visa experience and, your role in particular sometime later. But so you're now both based in Singapore, right? So
Yeah.
just tell me like a bit about the city, and is it that surreal how people talk about it?
It definitely is. I mean, okay, so I've lived in a few cities around the world, and I'd say Singapore is definitely my favorite city that I've ever lived in. Because it's just amazing because of how clean, safe, developed it is. It's like a full technological experience when you're in the city, because everything is automated. Everything, you can use your credit card. Like, you don't even need to carry your wallet anymore anywhere. Like, you have a credit card in your phone, and all, it's accepted everywhere. Public transportation, shops, stores, any place that you can think of. So you have no need to like carry your wallet anywhere. It's super safe. You can be out at like 3 a.m., 4 a.m. alone. It doesn't matter. And I've left my laptop in Starbucks to like reserve a seat for like 4 hours. So nobody steals here. So I think it's just a crazy city, and there's always so much happening in terms of, opportunities for your career. It's a huge capital hub, so you always have investors, you always have opportunities to raise money, you always have opportunities to do business. So it really is a very unique city, and definitely a little bit of a bubble, because I do feel like it's very safe and protected as compared to the rest of the world. So yeah.
But would you say that in a way also city inspires you to move forward, to do more things, just because, as well as you mentioned, right, of this like bubble that you surrounded, like people, business opportunities. Would you say so?
I think it's a result of the people as well, but I also think, while the benefit is a lot, and while, you have all of these benefits of safety, cleanliness, and things like that, it is also a very expensive city to live in. I think this year was like quoted as the most expensive city in the world to live in. And because of that, it's very expensive. So it's usually that drives me to work harder, because it is a very difficult city to live in if you don't have money. So I think that is something you also feel, when you're in the city and you're in like the main areas, everyone's kind of hustling, everyone's in a suit and rushing to work and rushing for lunch and very late night, like really bad hours and things like that. It's something that's very integrated into the city. So if you live here, you kind of catch onto it.
Right.
So yeah.
Interesting. So, I mean, I would say that in Germany, of course, in Frankfurt where I live, it's not the same, but kind of similar. You feel like you wake up and then you just spare your day somewhere in the city, and then you get your job done, and hustle on the side, and then you're back in bed, and then literally your house become a pit stop in a way.
Yeah.
Really you spend very little time. But for me, it's also like a motivator, right? In a sense, as you've said. But for you, again, back to your, quite an impressive experience. So the city, the this high pace of the city, the people, but what else really motivates you to, to go forward, maybe, and also enter in the startup ecosystem, like was there maybe any story in your family that you looked up to back in the day or still do? Any thought about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think where I actually grew up was a really small town in India. So it wasn't very different from places like Hong Kong and Singapore. So, it was like a very slow town where everyone kind of knows each other. And for India, that's really tough, because it's a lot of population. But
Yeah.
that's just to kind of give you a reference on how small that city was. And so even when I lived in that city, I didn't always feel like I belonged there because I don't know, I just had this thing, where always had really big dreams and I always wanted to do a lot with my life. So just being in that city, I didn't really connect with people there. And I always was looking for ways to travel, to like leave the city essentially. And the first time I got an opportunity was when I, went into university and got exposed to a whole other world around me.
But still, I mean, 17, it's kind of like a kid moving
Yeah.
abroad, you know? I moved out at 21 and it still felt like a mind-blowing experience for me. But for you moving out at 17, would you say there was some self-discoveries about yourself, or maybe, there's things like aha or wow moments when you saw that actually that even made me stronger now, or you could then kind of, you know, utilize this like discoveries about yourself in your career path or just in your personal growth, 3 years being abroad?
Yeah, 100%. Because, you know, like I mentioned, the city that I grew up in, it was a really small town. So when I was actually living in India, I used to watch a lot of movies and books and things like that. I think I used to almost use those as an escape. So I always, I watched a lot of Gossip Girl and I always wanted to live like that Gossip Girl life. But so when I moved to Hong Kong, it was like reality hit me because, I think I spoke English, obviously, but Hong Kong, you have a lot of Chinese people. So I didn't really speak the language there. And I had a very strong Indian accent. I dressed in a way that was very different from the way they dressed in Hong Kong. The food was different. And in general, like the whole perception of who I was, it was not something that, usually someone who's successful in Hong Kong is typically what I look like. So
Mm.
for me, in that moment, as a 17-year-old, I was like, okay, I just have to adapt. So I feel like, I changed the way I spoke, I changed the way I dressed, I changed a lot of different things about my identity, which, we also talked about the last time when we
Yeah.
spoke.
Yeah.
And, at the end of my 6 years in Hong Kong, I felt like there was a moment where I felt like I had everything that I wanted when I was a kid. I had a VC job, which is something which is very sought after. I had an amazing social life. And I was, I looked really good. Like I felt really good looking at myself in the mirror. And I was dating a guy who was from like a very influential family in Hong Kong. So I just felt like, I had like done everything. Obviously, I don't think I was still happy, which is a whole other topic.
Yeah.
But I felt like I'd gotten everything that I could out of that city, but it had required me to change too much about myself. And I think that was my biggest like aha moment. I think the process of getting to that, the amount of changes and adaptation it required me to do, I figured, that I was probably stronger than I'd ever imagined myself to be. So that was a big moment. And then another big aha moment was that even after getting all of that, you're not really happy because of how much you've changed. And now obviously I've tried to go back to my roots a lot more, and I'm definitely happier. So I think these were the two big aha moments. But I feel like you need to still do it to realize that this is not what's gonna make you happy, you know?
Yeah, because I was just about to ask, like, probably you hit that wall that, oh, now I'm in an identity crisis in a way,
Yeah.
Am I like Tanya, who actually moved here as a kid, 17? Or am I just this new superwoman, and not knowing myself anymore? Because as you said, right, we talked about it a bit, and I kind of experienced the same thing, right? Although probably I'm not like dating someone from an influential family here or something, still I would say that yeah, I have definitely some things to be proud of as well. But it's you know it's kind of like also surprise me and inspires me in a way how actually females, they come all the way from abroad, like change their identity and really wear so many hats, like this, and then also reach such a big success, right, in a VC, and then also doing a bunch of things in parallel. And I think also one of those things was that, we also kind of like briefly mentioned that it was that you're passionate to podcasting, right? You're like also
Yeah.
doing social media, like marketing things. And maybe let's just talk about this part of your story before we actually go into the VC world,
Yeah.
because I think also another thing, kind of how we clicked, right? So you've been doing it for quite some time, if I recall it correctly, right? With the podcast.
Yeah.
So maybe you can tell, like, how did you actually end up with this thing? Or was it like, okay, you woke up one day and then you just thought, now I will be a podcaster interviewing other people? Or was there any story that led to it?
I think it was a journey because so when I was in university, and I was in VC, I felt like, I was being exposed to a whole other world, which my friends didn't really understand. So I used to always try to explain it to them, that these are the people I'm meeting. And, as a 17-year-old, I was very starstruck because I was like, whoa, these founders are so cool. And then you're meeting all these amazing VCs and you're just 17. And so I was like, okay, like a cool way for me to show them what I'm doing is maybe I can start interviewing these people, and just putting it out there. And so that time I was really shy to do a podcast. So I used to write a blog. So I would interview them and then kind of transcribe it and then post it on Medium. And eventually I did a lot of those interviews and then somehow just kind of built up that confidence to actually do a podcast and release like videos online. And it was definitely a journey because I feel like I've been doing it since 2020. So now it's been 3 years, and it's always been something that I've done on the side. But I think in this moment, I enjoy doing it so much that I would love to kind of have it as a full-time career as well. But I don't know, we'll see about that.
The full time.
I would like it to be eventually. Yeah.
Right. So then you will be even more of an influencer then.
Yeah. I
How
hope so.
But how do you actually define influencer? Because I feel like that's also kind of another bubble.
Yeah.
Because when you Instagram, every second person is an influencer now. They just make all this reels, TikToks, YouTube. And sometimes it's just so overwhelming because you don't know who to follow, who is an actual person, to tell a story. I mean, of course, you can always feel it, right? When person do it for money, or is there like actual passion behind it? But what is an influencer for you?
Yeah, I think for me, an influencer, I know it's gonna sound cliche, but it's not someone who has like 1 million followers or like 2 million followers. Of course, those people are influencers. But I think it kind of goes a little bit deeper than that, in the sense of, at least for me, who an influencer would be is someone who is able to kind of tell their story or showcase their story in a way that would actually inspire people. Or even if it's just like one person or two people or three people, obviously the bigger the scale, the better. But like I've had people reach out to me, like this girl, she reached out to me very randomly on Instagram, and she told me how, she's been following me and my podcast and even my blog since I started writing my blog, basically. And then she started her own blog because of that. So I thought that was really cool. It was definitely one of the most satisfying things or messages that I'd ever received. So I think for me, that's what an influencer would be.
Yeah, and that's hiring, right? Like when you truly have this story, when people kind of circulate back to you, and because of you, actually, they
Yeah.
jump on your venture for themselves, and then they do whatever they want, right? And as you've said, not necessarily with million and followers, and yeah, but beautiful, beautiful. So, but I had that. I mean, also from chatting with you and also looking at your LinkedIn profile, so you're quite engaged in marketing, right? Like as an industry itself.
Yeah.
So you're also now the media strategist for a for a crypto startup. Then you also had some experiences before in the marketing. So what do you do precisely about marketing? Are you just like doing social media, or is it something more than just that?
It's a lot of things. So social media is a part of it. It is a significant part of it, actually, because crypto is more focused on Twitter. So I do a lot of Twitter marketing for my company. And then apart from that, I also do, help to build a community. So Discord, Telegram, build communities on that, get people to understand what the product is, help them understand why they should build on our infrastructure. It's a B2B company, so why they should build on our infrastructure. And I also write the company blog. Recently launched a podcast for the company as well. Stop it. And then also, I should just start a podcasting business, to be honest. And
yeah, you should. You should. And honestly, like if I'm not reading a book, then I'm listening to a podcast, to be honest.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing with my team, Any other time we really want to build up some knowledge in the industry, because thanks God in Europe, VCs, they also talk about it a lot. And just recently, last week, I met a VC from Berlin, and they operate in prop tech. And they actually built like a studio for the podcast. So, they also like seen that project in their pipeline to maybe create some content themselves. And that's beautiful, right? But yeah, sorry, back to you.
Yeah, so I think it's typically that, for the online stuff, but we also do a lot of offline marketing. So that typically involves like events marketing, going to conferences. I've also been invited as a speaker to conferences, in Asia. So it's a mix of both online and offline. But what I can say, the common theme between all of these things is essentially, I feel like marketing in the past was more focused on selling a product, but now it's become more focused on selling a story and selling, almost like establishing the company and the employees within it as like thought leaders versus just selling the product, is how I've seen marketing evolve. Yeah.
It's not just about now like doing this reels or Instagram posts. It's actually about doing viral, like, and creating the story out of it, right?
Exactly. Because I think there's right now like too much information overload. Like you said, when you open Instagram and so people are not being able to connect with all of the information. But what the way human beings are wired is we connect to stories, we connect to people. So
Yeah.
it's more essential to like put across a story, put across your own people, humanize brands. That's what is real marketing now, from my perspective, at least.
So, I mean, interesting point because also recently I connect with a couple of people who are now called or like titled not as a marketing specialist but a storyteller
Yeah.
you know. So would you say that, for example, for a startup, even in my portfolio or in the company where I work at, so we have a couple of startups and one in particular, so they're operating in the fine dining industry. And I just had a chat recently with the founder of the startup, and she is exactly now at this point when, the technicalities of the business are full set. But now they're looking, okay, how do we really build up our strategy, how we approach the client? And we also talked about marketing. So for a startup, would you say that they just should go and, let's say, fetch for an influencer, or shall they maybe just find their storyteller, who would like build them kind of the add-on to their brand and like will really tell them, okay, this is how you tell your story. Like
Yeah.
with the starting point, for a startup.
Yeah. I think for a startup, ideally, if the influencer or the storyteller is the CEO, that would be ideal. So, how you have people like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, who themselves are CEOs who tell the story of the brand. That would be ideal. But obviously, I understand as a CEO, you don't necessarily have time to do that, as well as maybe you don't have the skill set to do that, because I don't think all CEOs can do it. So I would say it would have to be a very strategic decision that you make then. You have to decide how you want to position the brand. So, if you take an example of the startup you talked about with the fine dining, ideally for something like that, you would want to create like this image of maybe if you want to take that stance where you want to make it very exclusive and you want to make it very like high end, then maybe you bring in, you throw like a party where you bring in these very high end guests and you have conversations with them, create like a whole campaign around that. Or if you want to make it more like aspirational luxury, then you want to bring in like bring in more influencers and things like that, get them to talk about the brand, maybe do like podcasts with them, things like
Right. That's the tool.
yeah, I think it's the best and the most accessible way to build a brand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this point, I'm just, I'm just like joking around it a bit. Yeah.
But yeah, so I think it has to be a strategic decision based on, I think the CEO should evaluate their own skills, see if they're able to do it. If not, then see if it makes sense based on their own brand positioning to bring in influencers. And even if they do bring in influencers, like what kind of influencers, how attached should the influencer be to their brand? How is it just, a couple of very high-end like socialites talking about it, or is it just, a bunch of those Instagram kind of mid-tier influencers talking about it, or is it the really like micro influencers you want to bring in? So I think it has to be like a very strategic decision, which is why I guess you need like marketing agencies and things like that to help with that. So yeah, it's a tough answer.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, I just wanted to listen, your take on the story.
Yeah.
Awesome. Then, I'll definitely have some notes to pass to my startup. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But since we're now, on the startup topic, so maybe just chat about, since, you also have like an immigrant background or quite international background. By the way, are you comfortable with the word immigrant?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Um, And so yeah, just tell me, for example, how do you see the difference between, India and then Singapore, maybe like also Hong Kong in terms of the startup ecosystem? Maybe very particular patterns that you see in terms of also female founders or tech industry. Your word in that.
Yeah, for sure. I think India is definitely, there's a lot more hustle there, for sure, because, like every second, yeah, definitely more than Singapore. Because Singapore is a big city, Singapore, Hong Kong, they have the same problems. They're both really big cities and they're both very expensive cities to live in. So usually people here who are entrepreneurs either come from very rich backgrounds so they can afford to take that risk, or, they fundraise and are already at a certain level. And then they come into Singapore because ease of doing business, law and order, and things like that. But typically, to live here and to start your own business is very hard because it's a very expensive city. So usually people are quite risk averse. They would more likely go for like banking jobs or consulting jobs. The very high paying corporate jobs is typically what happens in Singapore and Hong Kong. So because of that, the startup ecosystem hasn't fully developed in my perspective. But the good thing that Singapore has done is that incorporating businesses here is very easy. There's very low tax, and banking and all of that is very streamlined. So a lot of people within Southeast Asia, what they do is they set up businesses in Singapore and they raise capital from Singapore because all VC funds are in Singapore. But then the markets that they actually target are like Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, because those are typically bigger markets. It's cheaper for teams to operate from there. So that's why I think in Singapore itself, there are a lot of startups incorporated, which are like Singapore incorporated, but
Right.
they are not functioning out of Singapore.
Like also founders, they move abroad, like to other. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
But with India, you have a lot of it's a very cheap country to live in, and culturally, a lot of people stay with their families until they're married and things like that. So they don't have to worry too much about rent, food, and all of that. So there's definitely a bigger element of people being able to take risks in India because their basics are covered. And obviously you have a lot of computer talent coming out of India. So those are typically, founders. And recently there's been a lot of capital which has been going into India, especially from the US. So because of that, there's been like a huge boom in like startups. And we recently also had our own Shark Tank India, which came out. So you truly know that, it's become very mainstream to be a startup founder, which wasn't the case a few years ago. But it's definitely happening in India. So I would say in India, it's definitely a little bit more raw. It's not so proper where you have good offices for founders and things like that. But if you go to Bangalore, it's like every apartment will have its own startup going on. So it's very raw, it's very hustly, it's very like underground startup ecosystem kind of a vibe. Whereas in Singapore, it's more proper. Like Singapore, Hong Kong, they're both the same. Like it's very proper. You have like good offices for founders. The government does try to support a little bit, but at the end of the day, they can't cover like rent and they can't cover food and things like that. So you have to be already at quite a good level to be able to live here and be a founder. So
Okay.
and
Yeah,
yeah,
please.
and as a woman, I think in India, I would say in Singapore and Hong Kong, the gender ratio is a bit better. In India, it's usually still men. Like it feels like a really big boys' club, within the VC ecosystem, within the startup ecosystem, both. So if you're a woman, you definitely do feel like quite intimidated. But in Hong Kong and Singapore, I would say the ratio is a little bit better. at least amongst the founders, maybe not so much with the VCs, but founders definitely. But I also think, in both places like Hong Kong and Singapore, the gender issue, while it's still there, it's not as apparent as it is in other parts of the world. Like, I don't think there is like unequal pay here because of gender, or there isn't, yeah. But I do think, at the end of the day, things like fundraising and stuff, it still impacts it because these are very people businesses. So again, I'm sure there's a lot of problems with like fundraising, and even as a VC, I think if you're a female VC, there can be a lot of problems there. But I think it's better in India.
Mm. I'm just taking notes whilst you're speaking, because I have a couple of questions. So we keep saying that Singapore is expensive, and like also in terms of the startup founders, right? That you have to have a rich background before take on this risk. But how expensive are we talking about? Because now I'm like genuinely curious about that. How much, let's say, your average spendings as a junior specialist in Singapore right now?
I would say if you live in like a decent apartment, and you spend like, normal amounts of money on like food and things like that, I think you could spend about 5 to 6K US. But yeah, this is again like very modest. You're not like splurging, going out or anything like that. So 5 to 6K US per month. But again, you have to be very like, you have to cook at home and things like that to keep it 5 to 6K. But I would say about 8K is something that you would need on a monthly basis to be able to have like a decent life here. So yeah, it is quite.
That's
I don't know, what is it like in Germany, like in Frankfurt?
very depends. I mean, I'd say like you can make it with 3K euros. Maybe like 4 to feel even like very comfortable. But it's definitely less than 8,000 US dollars for sure. Yeah, because I mean we're also in a bit of like this rental crisis. I'd say also depending on the city, but it's still manageable.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. But so that was one thing. But another thing, in terms of also, the startup ecosystem, would you say that there are any particular industries that like upfront and that thrive the most, or is it more or less catching the same like global trend, when, for example, fintech, blockchain, or any specifics about Singapore and market there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you rightly picked up, it is fintech and blockchain just because it's a financial hub. So at the end of the day, VCs and things like that, they want to see an exit. And some of the biggest exits that happen here are through corporates. Like it's usually M&A. It's not typically companies going public because it's a smaller market. So typically with M&A, it's usually the larger banks, insurance companies, and things like that that acquire startups. So because of that, I would say fintech is the most developed. Prop tech is something that's coming up as well, just because Singapore has a huge real estate market. You have a lot of incumbents here, very large real estate companies. So I would say these two are the biggest in Singapore. Not so much on the consumer side because it's a small city, 5 million people. So I guess you can't scale it too much.
I see. Interesting. Because also like if we, for example, talk about Germany or European market, I also see now a bit of a shift in this terms of the industries where people or VCs, they're looking also into hardware, like in actual stuff they produce, or biotech, for example, is now also catching up, very deep science things. And that's also quite surprising because, for example, also in our portfolio, we are coming from the very thin background, but now we see popping up applications in the prop tech, in biotech, where you really can actually work on things and not necessarily only this, like cloud and digital space. So you wouldn't say that that's the thing in Singapore now, right? So it still kind of remains scalable techie solutions in terms of this. I see. All right. And also in terms of the VC, so then I guess they just kind of replicate the story, right? So they're more looking fintech into scalable things. Okay, got it. And from also VC's point of view, so back to your then part of the story, right? So you used to work in Click Ventures, if I recall it correctly, right? So what was your role there? Was it like an analyst, or what did you do? Just tell a bit about that.
Yeah, so I was an analyst. I started off as an intern and then moved into being a full-time analyst. So my role, I would say, was 70% networking, 30% research. So for people who might not be very familiar with how VCs invest, basically what happens typically is if a startup is raising, say they're raising like $5 million, then they would go to one VC, but obviously no one VC will give them $5 million. So, but if a VC really likes them, they'll be like, okay, I'll put in a little bit of money and I'll get my friends or other partner VCs to join with me. And so as a VC, you want to be those partner VCs. And that is done through networking. So my job was, I would say 70% like going to events, catching up with other analysts, trying to set up meetings with, just other VCs to see how we can collaborate, co-invest in deals. And then 30% of it was because we were a thesis-driven VC. So normally how we would bring in deals also, apart from referrals from other VCs, is we would have like our own thesis. And, if we had a very strong conviction on something. So maybe an example of it would be like one of my thesis was that, influencer-driven marketing. This was also like 4 years ago. So influencer-driven marketing will be really big in the next 4 or 5 years. Now it seems quite obvious, but that time it was just kind of starting out. And so we'll need a lot of the infrastructure for that, because influencers, they need insurance. Influencers, because at the end of the day, they're like contractors, right? Or like independent workers. They'll need to be able to manage their money. They'll need to have a place where they can manage their content, connect with brands, and so like come up with a whole kind of ecosystem for influencers. So that was my thesis. And we ended up investing in a company in China that did these things. And then one of my funds thesis say was that blockchain technology would be really useful for something like compliance. So we ended up investing in 3 of those companies in different parts of the world. So that is typically how we would invest in a thesis-driven fund. So I would say my job was 70% networking and 30% doing research for a thesis and presenting it to the partners. Because at the end of the day, as an analyst, your job is to only bring in deals. And then you have other people who are responsible for portfolio management and things like that. So they do that.
But that's interesting because, so thesis-driven VC, because, I know, right? What does that mean? Like in Europe, it kind of works the same, but usually from my experience, from what I've heard, like usually this thesis is not something that necessarily, might be like analyst is forming, but usually it happens on the partner level, like investment manager level. But your VC, it seems like it was a bit more open, right, to this sort of thing. It was incorporating ideas of all team members, right? Oh, beautiful.
Sure.
Beautiful.
And I think it was also a function of how different team people position themselves, because, again, not every person can cover every industry, right? So when I first got into VC, I realized that, my partners and the associates, they probably have more experience, better connections. But I was trying to find like what would be my edge, or how can I add value so that they keep me. And what I realized was there was one market that no one understood in the fund except for me, and that was the Gen Z market, because I'm a Gen Z. So no matter, they can have all the experience and all the connections, but it's just the market that I'm most familiar with. So I leaned into it very heavily. And so eventually I did all of the Gen Z thesis for my fund. And it actually got to the stage where even other VC funds, if they were evaluating like a very consumer Gen Z type of deal, they would reach out to me and ask me for my opinion on it. So yeah, it's yeah, it's just about finding your edge and seeing what no one else at the fund understands, and you just understand it very well. So they keep you. And
Awesome.
yeah,
I mean, that's the way to go, right?
yeah,
Really find your USP in a way, and then
yeah.
that amazing. But are you like still in touch with your colleagues from the Click Ventures, or do you follow the activities of the fund, what they're doing now? So how would you say that, let's say the fund changed in a span also like of investments since the moment when you joined them and like now? I think that's been quite a time frame, right? So
Yeah,
much
yeah.
between. So was there anything like in particular you noticed maybe there?
Yeah, I think
Dynamic of the funds, like is changing because of course the market is like transforming right now, right?
yeah, 100%. I mean, when I first started interning at Click Ventures, it was before the WeWork IPO. So it was, the market was very euphoric in that moment. It was the real bull market for tech, which was going on. And it was incredible. Like I would go for all these events, and there would be people writing like a few $100,000 checks, like right left, everywhere around me. And I was like, whoa, what is this? And we would like go to parties, and our bar tabs would be like maybe twice the amount of my rent for the month. And I was like, okay, what is this world? So yeah, at the time, there was a lot of investment activity going around, and everyone had this concept of like growth at all costs, which was more driven by companies like Uber, companies like Airbnb, Facebook, which again they weren't profitable until they went public, or much after they went public. But after the WeWork IPO kind of failed, uh, that's when VC funds really started questioning this model of tech growth, which is growth at all costs. And that's when they started caring about things like profitability, revenue, and things like that. So it was quite interesting because in the beginning, right after the WeWork IPO failed, the expectation that VCs had suddenly was in your pitch deck, you would just have one slide, which was like path to profitability. And it's just something that founders put in for the sake of putting it in. It wasn't really something that even, VCs just wanted to show it to their LPs that, this is something that now we are looking at. But it's not something that was truly like they imbibed it. But then we had like a huge, during COVID, like when COVID had just hit, VC funds stopped investing. They were being very cautious with their investments and things like that. So that's when companies really had to show their profitability. And it was the first time in a long, long time that profitability became like a huge factor. Revenue became a huge factor for VCs to look at before they would put in money. So I thought that was like a huge evolution. Then, of course, during COVID, like my fund, we completely paused investing as well, along with the other funds, because we weren't sure what was going on. And also, a lot of our portfolio companies, they needed like very immediate help because we weren't sure how long it's going to last. So everyone kind of moved from deal sourcing to like portfolio management during that initial phase of COVID. So that time my role changed quite significantly. So we became almost like consultants for our portfolio companies, where we came in, did like very detailed reports on things that they could do, to conserve capital. So whether that
So
meant like
operational VC in a way.
exactly, yeah. Which was a really cool experience actually, because with some of the companies we had to help them come up with restructuring plans for their workforce. Maybe, if they had to let go of people, we had to come up with a plan for that. Or if some companies needed like a quick fundraise, then we had to like reach out to our other friends, other VCs, see if we could arrange like a quick fundraise so that they could at least have 6 months of capital. And then for some of them, if they needed to make like a quick pivot, then help them get deals. So like one of the companies that we had invested in, it was like a near field communication payment company. So what they do is if you have like a phone, they have like this payment terminal, And if you have a phone, you can just pay using that payment terminal. So the asset was essentially that near field communication thing. But because during COVID, no one was going to shops. So we totally lost out on revenue. Like that company was going to shut down. So how we helped them pivot was that we used that asset which they had, which was their technology, that near field communication technology, and help them get deals with like property management companies. So, when people were going to hospitals, they were going to hotels and things like that, they could use that to like enter different premises instead of opening doors with their hands and things like that. So we had to get them those deals very quickly to get them revenue. And so, yeah.
Sure, you did some long hours during that time.
Yeah, that was definitely a very rough time because you had to save, like, there were 40 companies in our portfolio. We were like five of us, so we were almost like 8 people working, like 8 companies per person. Obviously, I was under a partner working with them, but still, it was really hectic. And then eventually, when COVID kind of, it became like a more common thing, then we resumed investing. And then again, my role transitioned back into being an analyst. And then towards the end, when I left, it was, our third fund was kind of drying up and they were in the process of raising a fourth fund. So my role became more of like supporting with like fundraising for the fund, which was a really cool experience as well. So I've definitely done quite a lot of things there.
It sounds like it. But what was an average size of a fund, if you can disclose?
Oh yeah. So the we've done 3 funds before that, which were all 25 mil each. And then the fourth fund, which they were raising, I'm not sure how much of that is already closed now, but it was gonna be 50 million. So
Okay.
yeah.
Good amount. But so what would you say in the sense of a ticket size, per startup? Like, what was also the dynamic of that change? So was it, I mean, of course, you mentioned, right, that in COVID it was paused completely. So you like kind of converted into this more operational VC. But then when, let's say, COVID became something that we're used to, so was there like any change in the dynamic of the ticket? So how much of investment your fund would give to a startup?
I think our ticket size stayed the same. So our ticket size was between 250K to 350K, about that much. So ticket size stayed the same, but we were definitely more cautious, in terms of who we invested in. A lot more due diligence, a lot more, referral checks and things like that. Um, so I do think there was a change from that perspective, but I think it could have also been because we were kind of coming towards the end of our fund. So usually when you've just raised a fund, you're a little bit more free with like investing it. But when you're towards the end of the fund, then you're a little bit more cautious about where you're putting in money.
I see.
Yeah.
And also to this point of, gender equality or gender in the startup ecosystem in general. So would you say that for your fund, for your VC, that was also a point that you were looking at? Let's say like, would you be a bit more supportive or lean towards female founders in your fund, or that didn't play much of a role?
Yeah, I mean, so our managing partner, she was a woman. And because of that, we did, help a lot of, like, we did take that extra look at a female founded business just because we wanted to promote more of that. And so we did have like a pretty good ratio with our portfolio at least. So we did have like a lot of female founded companies, still not as many as I would have liked, but ideally it should be like 50-50. But I guess it's also a pipeline problem. There's fewer women starting businesses and things like that. So it was definitely a focus. And even for me as an analyst, because sometimes you're like the first kind of person that the deals come to and you pass them along. So I would definitely say I was a little bit more lenient with like female founded businesses. So yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Um, but what would you say, like about raising money now? So, for example, if you are a startup in 2024, um, what should I do? Like imagine I'm a startup, early stager. I have my first client, for example. I bootstrap for some time. Now I ran out of money. Or maybe I'm even before that stage. Like what do I do?
Yeah, I think 2024 is going to be, at least in the beginning, it's going to be quite challenging to raise money, as we've already seen, like, in 2023 as well. Because there's, in general, like overall in the world, like the capital's kind of drying up. So people are very cautious, especially with like investing in tech companies, because we had a lot of like, I feel like almost like that tech bubble, it kind of burst, not fully, but a little bit. So I do think that people are a lot more cautious investing in tech companies. So if I was like a founder going into 2024, I would really focus on making sure that it's a solid business firstly. Making sure if you're at that very, very early stage, then making sure that you actually are able to show that there's product market fit. And it doesn't, a lot of times people think that it has to be like a very expensive thing, right? Because you have to show revenue and things like that. But sometimes you can just demonstrate that in a very simple way. So, like, I can give you an example. Like, there was this company we were looking at that basically used to do like holiday planning for people. It's like they would do like the itinerary and things like that. And the way that they demonstrated product market fit was they literally set up a Facebook group, got people to join the Facebook group, and whoever needed like someone to curate like a holiday itinerary for them, they would do it for them on the Facebook group. And eventually people started paying them for it. So that already shows to VCs that there is a huge demand for something like this. You can generate revenue for it. And the reason why you need money from them is to scale it. So that's what I would do. Like I would show like real product market fit. I would show how I can get in revenue, and ideally already have like some revenue. That would make like a really strong case to a VC in 2024, I think.
Good take.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Traction, product market fit, and then ideally show some revenue. So that would
Yeah.
be as three things to go. Okay.
Yeah.
But would you say that VC is like an absolute necessity for a startup? Because sometimes, I feel like also with our startups, they're so blown away by this idea to raise money with VC. And to be honest, then we'll literally have, like do this talks with startups and telling them, hey guys, actually VC is probably the last station you should reach.
Yeah.
Because first, we know about bootstrapping, family and friends round, then maybe you go to business angels, personal investments, and then VC, because again, VC, they will take quite some equity of your business, So, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think VC, it depends on the goal of the business and at what stage they're at. But I would say if you're at that really early stage, then I wouldn't really take VC money if I was them, because I would want to retain like as much of the equity as possible. And I feel like, especially now, there are a lot of government grants and things like that, which you can get. So I know at least in Hong Kong and in Singapore, like the government, they can give you up to 250K in grants, which is quite a significant amount, for someone just starting out with no equity. It's literally just to promote the startup ecosystem. So that's the route that I would go down if I was starting my own business, at least in the beginning. And then um if my goal was to really hyperscale, it's only at that stage I would take VC money. But if my goal was to generate enough, like just to bootstrap it, have revenue, get the revenue to cover the costs and things like that, then I wouldn't take VC money. So I guess it depends on the ambition of the founder, where they see the company. And yeah, only I would say VC money is probably not, I think people hype it up a little too much, because you also get a lot of PR and things like that if you get like good VC money, which helps, right, to get clients. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily like the first thing you should try.
Mm. I mean, to be honest, I feel like the overall culture around VC is very hyped. Like if you
Yeah.
work in it, you're like, oh, you're a cool guy. You're wearing
Yeah.
like sneakers and this very nice fit, and everyone wants you. In a way to get connected with you, right?
Yeah.
Like hyped over not only to get the money, but also to be just part of this ecosystem. So
Yeah. It's
that's
definitely a lifestyle job, I would say.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. But another thing, what I wanted to chat with you about. So we talked about your experience breaking into VC right while in business, while still in university, and your overall experience about VC. But my question is, so again, quite a background, a lot of experience behind your back, right? I bet it might be impossible even at some point to do it all yourself, like all without having someone by your side. So was there maybe in your life a person, or maybe you've heard or like received such remarkable advice from someone you interviewed for your podcast, or maybe there was just someone like as a mentor in your life who just kind of showed you the path or directed you in the right direction? Was there anyone in your life like that?
Yeah, for sure. I think so. I have to say, this is where being a woman, like, it really kind of came in, because I felt like all the people who really mentored me and kind of opened doors for me in the beginning were all women, which I found really surprising. Of course, now, once you've already reached a certain level, then both men and women help you. But I think in that beginning kind of a thing, it was always women who helped me and gave me that first shot. But there was like this one person in particular. So her name is Molly Bloom, and she has like an Oscar-nominated movie based on her life, which is called Molly's Game, which I would definitely recommend everyone to watch because it's a great movie. But it's a funny story how we met as well, because so I watched the movie, and I thought it was gonna be like a poker movie, but it was actually a lot about like female empowerment, and I just really, really liked the movie. And after I finished it, I was like totally blown away by her. I was like, whoa, this is the kind of person, I want to be friends with. So I used to reach out to her like on Instagram, and then right after that, like COVID hit. So she used to be an alcoholic, and she started this community during COVID, which was to bring people together. This was like for people who might need support, who are kind of going through their own journey of like addiction, or even like to anyone in the world, to be honest. And they would meet every night, and she would bring in like different kinds of experts to come in and talk, and it was free for everyone to join in. So I just saw it on her Instagram. It was like a Zoom link that she had posted. So I just joined in, and and she was there, and I was like, whoa, this is so cool. And yeah, so the first day was more around introductions. There were not that many people. It was like 16, 17 people in the beginning. And so, we would just talk about our lives, talk about our days. There were a lot of people who had lost their jobs during COVID who were part of that community. So they would talk about that. And then I think just through that, we kind of became friends, just through that community. And then I used to write a blog at the time, which I sent to her because I was talking about the blog, and she was like, oh, you should send it to me and I'll check it out. So I sent it to her, and she really liked it. So she helped me promote it. And just through that, we kind of became friends. And then eventually she was going to shut down the community after like a year. And so I sent her this massive email just telling her how much she means to me, and how much her movie meant to me after I watched it. Her story was so inspiring and things like that. And I asked her for a job, basically. And I was like, can I work for you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Tanya, just go to and boldly tell people I want the job. I want to work with. That's your trick. Got it.
It is. And so she was like, okay. So she was like, what do you want to get out of working for me? So I was like, I want to be able to pick your brain because I do think that there's very few people in the world who I've met who are as smart and have achieved so much professionally, but are also such good people internally. Like she's super humble, very warm. For someone who's done so much, she's like the nicest person I've ever met. And so I was like, there's such few people in the world like that for me. So I just want to hang out with you and just be around you. And also, I want to be able to have access to your network. And so she was like, you don't have to work for me for that because I know you have an offer from a VC fund. So you don't want to. I'd asked her for like an assistant job. So she was like, you don't want to be like my assistant over like a VC job. So she's like, but I can just mentor you. And so she set up like this weekly call that we used to have. And now it's been 4 years and we still have it. So yeah,
Uh,
I know. I've learned so much from her, honestly, like everything about my professional life. I think I went through a lot of imposter syndrome, which she helped me deal with. There was a lot of, I used to feel like very intimidated to be the only woman a lot of times in like a room, to be the only woman, to be the only Indian. And so she helped me like kind of change my mindset around that, helped me become more confident, become better at even understanding myself. So we went through like long periods of time and she was helping me understand who I am, become less of a people pleaser, be more open to like asserting myself. She's helped me a lot personally as well. Like, she helped me identify good men for relationships, helped me break up with men who weren't so good.
uh,
Yeah.
we all need, that Molly Bloom in our lives.
For sure. So it's just been such a blessing to have her. And, like most recently, it's only this year that I started getting invited to like conferences to speak at. And she's the motivational speaker now. So I've been getting a lot of help from her to be able to speak, publicly and being able to connect with the audience and things like that. So I really appreciate everything that she's taught me. And I think the biggest thing with her is that she never expects perfection. And she always tells me that as well. And even for her, like she's the first person to admit, she's like, yeah, I've done some cool things, but I'm in by no means perfect, and I don't expect perfection out of people. But as long as, you continue to work hard, you're honest to who you are and things like that, that's what's more important to me. So I think that's what I appreciate about her. Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, that's such a blessing, right? I think that's something really you have to be credited for, having such a person in your life. Because, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, but for me, like this mentorship, it's also kind of I'm looking into like recently in my life because sometimes I feel like, okay, therapy, it's great, but with my therapist, I wouldn't be talking like about also some professional things, right? Because at the end of the day, therapist there is just to heal my inner things, or like maybe, as you mentioned, back you up with your bad relationships, with some toxic situations, right? But I feel like also to have someone from the industry or, that with that level of success as her, right? That just helps you exponentially, and like even more to really find your path in your life and like you as a person, you as a female founder, you as a, I don't know, a strategist, or whoever you are, right?
Yeah.
It's just something like really, really unique. Um, Maybe one day I'll write an email to her, and tell them, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like for that matter, you really, or each person individually has to have their own heroes in a way, like someone they really look up to, because mentorship is also like a very individual story, right? Like in a way, so you have to really bond with that person, maybe have some common ground in a sense to
Yeah.
mentorship, right?
100%.
Oh, beautiful. But Tanya, you know, I think we're like slowly but surely will come to the end of this interview, but tell me like what's maybe the one line, you know, to really tell who Tanya is, or like what is your value in your life, or maybe also like a good advice to whoever will watch this interview, you know, just maybe something about that.
Yeah, so I think there's like the tough one. I think there's actually, yeah, I guess there's like a quote that I always kind of go back to whenever I'm kind of struggling or hitting like a dead end, or I'm trying to do something new and it's not working out or something like that. So the quote is actually given to me by Molly, funnily enough, but she was yeah, of course. But she always tells me like the only limitation that you have is in your mind. And I think that's really true, because sometimes you tell yourself stories around who you are, and sometimes it can limit you into believing that that's the kind of person you are. But I think, human beings in general, they have a lot of, I think every person has a lot of potential to do a lot with their lives and to live a significant life, which everyone wants. And that sometimes the only thing that's stopping you is your own self. So you just have to get out of your own way, I guess. But I mean, I'm by no means a professional motivator or a motivational speaker or anything like that. So yeah.
Man, I find I love that, you know, that's, and I totally can stand for that as well, because at the end of the day, it's all in our head, right?
Yeah.
So that's 100%. But maybe any sort of advice also to any other females, you know, like in tech, who want to break their image, or who are too shy, or maybe like just tell something about how can you actually like break maybe into the ecosystem, especially in the Singapore, right? Because I also like to kind of like connect and maybe bring value locally, right? So, for example, if you're a female founder in Singapore and you want to find the right community, where should I go? How should
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. I think the biggest thing is, first, I guess you have to start with yourself and you have to see what kind of a female founder or like a founder do you want to be. So for me, it was very clear. Like, I think in general, there's when you think of someone working in tech, at least in Asia, it's not like a very glamorous job the way it is in the US or Silicon Valley, where, you're like a startup founder and it's like a cool thing to do. In Asia, when, you think of like startup founders, you always think of like these men in hoodies kind of coding in the basement. It's that kind of a vibe. So for me, it was very clear to me that that's not who I am. I'm not like this nerdy guy, sitting in a basement coding. Um, I like dressing up. I'm very girly, and I wanted to keep those parts of myself. And so that's the kind of brand I also wanted to build, to show people that, yeah, you can be like this very girly person. Like whenever I'm speaking at conferences, I always wear like this really bright pink outfits, just to kind of emphasize on the fact that you don't have to be like this very masculine bro kind of a person to work in tech. I think there's space for everyone. It's a big industry and you should just be who you are. So, I think the biggest thing as a female founder or a founder in general is to identify who you are, what you stand for. And then, when you're trying to find that community, I think for me, what has really worked well is I actually really enjoy like the people who is like my network or like my community are people who I genuinely enjoy being friends with. Like I would hang out with them even if it was not like work related or anything like that. They're just generally people I would invite for my birthdays. I would hang out with on like a random Saturday, go grab a movie or something like that. So I wouldn't like force this networking thing or like having like a tech community around me, which I've done in the past. But I felt like it always felt like work, going for these meetups, um, doing activities with them. It just felt like too much work. So now, whenever I go for events and stuff, I usually try to find, fewer people, like maybe one or two people, and find people who I genuinely connect with. find people who I genuinely would want to be friends with and hang out with, and add those people to my network. And what I've found is maybe I do have fewer people in my network now, but they're definitely more high quality, and they're definitely willing to help you out in a bigger way than, having a lot of people with like more shallow connections. So I think that's been a huge kind of difference for me. So I would say in Singapore, how you can find that is honestly, a lot of it is through building your own brand, because if you're like honest to yourself and putting that out, then people who connect with that reach out to you themselves. Or it's through just a lot of luck. Like you just have to go to a lot of events and try to see who you vibe with. Uh, yeah, I think those are the two biggest ways, I would say. Yeah.
Especially about events, because recently I also posted something on my Instagram. I'll be also like putting a link here, but I literally said the same thing that, startups ecosystem, it has a lot to offer in terms of events. And if you go to each and everyone and will try to bond with each and every person there, you will just like go nuts. I swear to God. So you have to be very selective, right? Like about that, who you really talk to. You can also do a bit of like, your research beforehand, seeing some other people who are interested in this event, maybe. So that also helps a lot. Or just to see the scope of event, like what is the value, why you go in there, and what kind of people, you shall expect there. Amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, what's next for you? So are you going to become a podcaster now? Are you going to be entering in a VC again? Or maybe you will work in as a media strategy for quite some time. What's next for you?
Oh, it's a tough question. I've been trying to answer that as well. It's the end of the year, so I've been thinking about, what's my focus for 2024. So it's a good time to kind of reflect as well. So, I mean, ideally, I think I've always been a storyteller. I really enjoy telling stories for brands, telling stories for people through my podcast, telling my own stories through, Instagram reels and things like that. So I definitely want to stay in that space. So I don't think I'd be going back into VC anytime soon. But I think focusing a lot more on my own personal branding is definitely something that I want to do, whether through podcasts, speaking at conferences, doing my own short form content on Instagram. But also, I guess I really enjoy like crypto, because it's a very fast-paced industry. Things are always happening. So as someone who's like doing marketing for a crypto company, you always have to be kind of a little bit on your toes, which is very interesting to me at least. So yeah, I think I definitely would continue like staying in the crypto space, building my own brand, creating content, and yeah, I think professionally at least, that's where I'm at. Yeah.
So then for more content to see Tanya's activities, also my activities, will be putting all the links down below. So to our LinkedIn profiles. And then I think we can call it a day. I find this a very insightful interview, also learning about the Singaporean ecosystem and your background. And again, you're quite impressive and like mind-blowing, experience, what you've achieved so far, 24th. I think that's just beautiful. And I want to say big thank you to you, to your time. And I wish you all the best with whatever affirmations for 2024 you have in storage for you. And just, thrive and be even better.